welcome everybody to a new episode. In this episode, it's going to be an Asia special because for the first time in this podcast history, we're going to merge two interviews into one. It's basically like two shorter episodes, one with Reese and one with Mo. I will introduce them soon. And I met them both at this Effective Altruism conference, and as this podcast is a lot about like going into different like world issues or ways to improve the world and so on, I found both of these two men pretty interesting. So I was like, hey, do you want to talk together on the podcast? Maybe like I can learn something from you, and like I want to know more about like what do you actually do. Yeah. And okay, so with like Mo or Moritz, but we call him Mo, Lohmann, he is in Hamburg and he's working with like Asia politics. So it's going to be like a lot of policy talk and so on, like EU, Asia, and yeah, like we will get into that stuff. And as some of you might know, I'm not that into politics, or like I don't understand it that well, but luckily Mo is this like amazing, kind dude who like it's really easy to talk to. And I remember going around at the conference and Mo was just like smiling and like hugging people, just being this like cool dude. So I really appreciate that we met, Mo. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining me on a podcast episode to get to know each other a little bit better. Appreciate that. That's cool. And I hope people will have fun when you listen to Mo's part of this podcast, and hopefully learn some new stuff. And then you have Reese Wong, which is a young entrepreneur, Hong Kong. He has started this non-profit called Asaya. I will link it down below so you can check it out more. And he was also just like he was recognized or like selected as one of the global shapers from the World Economic Forum, which was also pretty sick, I gotta say. And he is more of this like energized, like he has so much like what do you call it, like so much like power and energy and like passion for like making a difference and for trying to lift up the voices of like younger people, and especially in Asia. So that's why I thought this was like super cool to like merge these two together, totally different ones, but then both of them has like something to do with Asia. And then I'm also half Asian, so you can just throw that in there, and then it's like super Asian episode. And probably like half of you who listen to this episode will be from Asia. Isn't that cool? Yeah, okay. But not to joke around too much, I think we can just jump straight into the episodes. So I think first we will go with Mo, and after that you will hear from Reese. But just know we will, as always, have timestamps in the episode, so please just check the description and so on if you are only here to listen to Mo or to Reese, or if you want to see like the timestamps of what the different things we are talking about is. And yeah, I guess that's it. I hope everybody's having an amazing Sunday if you listened to it today when I launch it, or whatever day you listen to it. I hope you're having a nice day. Anyways, that's my point. So that's it. So let's just jump straight into the conversations.
Well then.
Cool.
Thank you for welcoming me on the podcast, good sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying yes.
Gladly.
Come here and talk about policy and Asia politics. And yeah, like why don't you start with like what are you currently like working on, and like how did you end up there?
Gladly. So how does one start this properly? So my name is Moritz Lohmann, in the EA community also known as Mo Lohmann, because there's way too many Moritzes out there.
Not that many Mo's.
Indeed. Yeah, true. That was kind of a nicer abbreviation, right? As Mo Lohmann, I have tried to focus on the intersection between the EU and the sort of China side of things in EA, but also in the world. So cool. I come from sort of a history and politics background. I studied in Leiden University College here in the Netherlands. Which is why I was really psyched to be invited in Rotterdam to do some things. I really like the city, but I also really like studying in The Hague. And I was there for 3 years. I did half a year of time in Taiwan, which was one of the coolest times of my life.
Wow.
National Taiwan University. I can recommend that to anyone.
Damn.
After that, I went to the Hamburg city government, where I'm still working right now,
Cool.
as a sort of Asia affairs officer. Yeah, or China affairs officer, actually, if you want to be specific.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that includes doing event management. That includes doing preparation briefs for Hamburg politicians that meet with Chinese actors.
Exactly.
And in total, it's a really diverse job that had me the opportunity to do a lot of contacting with a lot of interesting people. Chinese, we call it guanxi.
And why did you choose it, by the way? Like
China?
Yeah.
I think
Or
it's
like
a
politics and China. Yeah, both of them.
I chose, I think, politics and China both, because I really thought, first, politics is something that I think I've really been passionate about for a while. I think a lot of people think politics, you need to join a party, but actually, if you work in the government, you can be partyless and still have a good time. So that's something that I've really always wanted to try. And then the second thing that I quite like about China, for example, is that there's very few people that do Chinese, but then Chinese as a language is very needed, right? So you have these two intersecting curves, right? So sort of the need for a language, and then I guess the people doing a language. And China really has, or Chinese has a really great intersection there.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to use that, but also I just studied it back in 8th grade in high school. And then I did an exchange program in Shanghai in 10th grade. And then I went to Beijing after my high school graduation for half a year to do English teaching. So I've been living in China for on and off a while. And I wanted to kind of bring that expertise to the table, and the government gave me the opportunity to do that. So that was
that's
nice.
so nice. Yeah. I actually I am 12.5% Chinese.
Oh.
And I studied Chinese for 1 year in high school, but I can't really remember anything almost. But I was in Beijing for 2 weeks also. So that's also why I have like a little bit extra interest in this.
Yeah.
Because I'm considering maybe like moving back, or like, I didn't live there though, but like to go back and like live there for longer perhaps. And like, and I am also like half Asian. So like the rest of the percentages are from Thailand. So yeah, like my mom would love me to maybe go into Asia politics, and also a lot of like the followers, like listeners and viewers or so on, I guess like 30-40% are from Asia.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by, I guess, people that show interest towards this, because if I'm going to be very honest with you, in the movement of effective altruism, you have approximately 90% being non-Asian and 99% being non-Asia interested. So at least it seems to me that way.
Yeah, I get it.
So, you have a lot of people focusing on the big universities, but then big university in the East doesn't seem to have so much of a, big thing going on. Like there's Tsinghua, there's Beida, there is a National University of Singapore, but those don't necessarily have, at least in my experience, big EA groups.
Okay.
So hopefully that will change in the future.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And so since this is like the first episode I'm doing on like policy in general, can we like welcome us into that space? Like, like an introduction, or like, what do you think?
Gladly.
Cool.
Oh God, that's such a catchphrase now. Policy as an arena is, I think, an interesting cause area, because it focuses on being sort of a means to an end rather than being very content heavy. Of course, it's a vehicle for people to bring their content to a new level. But if I'm going to be very honest with you, I chose policy not because I thought it was the most impact heavy. I thought it was just, it was something really interesting. It was something very diverse, because in a lot of areas that I could have gone to instead, you're very focused on one thing. Whereas in policy, at least so far, it's been a combination of event management. It's been diplomacy, right? You need to kind of figure out, somebody wants something from you, but you're not allowed to give it to them. How do you find something that's in the middle? I have a really good example of that actually recently. So we want to create a really cool event in Hamburg called the Hamburg China-Taiwan.
Okay, cool.
It's bringing Chinese government actors and German government actors together. And it's really been difficult recently with the political situation in the world to actually really invite Chinese government speakers, because if you invite them, then you need to be really scrutinous. You're now not allowed to invite people from Taiwan anymore. You're now not allowed to, or you could still, but you have much more scrutiny, right?
Okay.
You are, if you have Chinese government speakers there, then you surely need to look very deeply at all of your other speakers. Have they said something bad about the Chinese government in the past? Because if they have, then they might not, then the Chinese government people just might not come. You know, and they might say, "Oh, we cannot be seen on the same panel as actor XYZ," and so that makes it a bit difficult. But so instead of putting them on panels, we've now resorted to putting them as like keynote speakers at the front, which I guess gives the event legitimacy on the Chinese side, but still doesn't lead to diplomatic problems. And that's kind of like an interesting example how you try to find a middle way between these things. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, and then more specifically for like Asia politics, why that, or like what's important?
What's important there? First, I talked already about the fact that it's a really fucking neglected issue. I'm sorry for cursing.
Yeah, it's okay.
Damn.
That's the first cursing on the podcast.
Yeah?
I think. Yeah, it
Ooh,
is.
hello.
Welcome. Woo! Yeah.
Let me break in that little glove here. Yeah. I don't cuss myself so much, but I do sometimes do it when I really want to state a point.
I get it. Yeah,
And
same. So
right?
That's okay.
Yeah. I think it's really fucking important that there needs to be a balance between East and West. And so Asia policy should focus on making that happen. China is an actor that is increasing in global need and increasing in global activity. And if we just do transatlantic activity most of the time, we're not really focused on actually doing, for example, Eurasian relations. And I won't even start about how little we actually do with Southeast Asian actors. You mentioned that part of your family is from Thailand. I am technically responsible for part of East Asia in the Hamburg city government, and Thailand has come up approximately 2 times throughout the 2 years that I was working there, which is very little, right?
Yeah.
So Vietnam came up once or twice because during the corona thing, they were very helpful. And then some other corona epidemic, they needed breathalyzers. So we donated some.
Okay.
And then otherwise, there's usually some scandal that German tourists get up to some problems. And so we need to help them out.
Exactly.
Those things happen. But besides that, yeah, we don't really sadly have to do so much with Southeast Asia because there's not really a lot of city partnerships going on. That's usually a really big catalyst, actually. City partnerships between sort of city of Hamburg and city of Shanghai, for example. City of Hamburg, city of Busan. City of Hamburg, city of Osaka. You know, you have Korea, you have Japan, you have China. The 3 big giants of East Asia. And then maybe sometimes you'll have, I don't know, you have an Asia trip of the mayor, and then he would visit those 2 countries. He wouldn't necessarily go to Southeast Asia because he would say, oh yeah, there's no city partnerships there. Why should I go? Or we don't really have a lot of stakeholders that work together with our city there. Why should we go?
That's so interesting. Okay, but what do they do in like city partnerships?
They write so-called memorandums of understandings that work once every 2 years. And they get renewed by sort of, having them underlined by sort of the main actors in the 2 cities and how much they interact with one another. So say for example, clause 1.1 is, we hereby declare that the cities of Hamburg and Shanghai will work together for the next 2 years, and the issues on which they will work together are the following. And then 1.2 will be trade, 1.3 will be, environment.
So it's just like officially stating that 2 cities are collaborating in some way?
Yes, but I think what's more interesting about it is it functions sort of as a database for who's actually in the 2 cities collaborating. So what we did as a city government is Shanghai told us, hey, we have player XYZ, say, for example, the Shanghai Institute for Teenage Education. And they really want to do a lot more with German as a language. So they work together with the Goethe Institute in Hamburg. And those 2 actors are now connected. Cool. Now, what if the Shanghai side tells us, hey, our project side is not working anymore. You should now go to the Goethe side and tell them, hey, this project is dead. So we're basically sometimes an in-betweener when the 2 actors don't want to talk to each other. But often it's also that the Chinese side will say, oh yeah, we want the contract to look a certain way. And then we have to tell this to the Hamburg side. So say, for example, the Department of Science in the government of Hamburg made a contract with the Department of Science in Shanghai about TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. Hugely controversial thing because in the West, some people say, oh, that's not real medicine. And in the East, people consider this to be a really like stupid attitude, right? It's really privileged attitude as well. So they will say, okay, cool. You now need to find like a way for yourself to communicate because the Chinese side will say they have strived to make important relations, and they will now strive to get like a proper realization as being proper medicine in the West. And then the Western side will say, no, that's actually bullshit. That didn't happen. Instead, we did a dialogue talking about the future of our cooperation, which is like the most tame wording you could potentially have.
Okay.
And then after 2 back and forth, you kind of get to like a proper how it's going to look in the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh, okay. And
Sounds boring, right?
they're a bit technical. Like,
It's technical, but it's really fun because you can really see the cultures of the two countries kind of flowing into one another.
Huh, wow. Okay. What about like for people, who think that this is really interesting and are listening now and being like, okay, like this is cool. Maybe I want to do something here. Like, how do you go forward to like work in like Asia politics and so on?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So you want to find in your country the governing body that tells your government how to attach itself to or from Asia, right? So you want to say, for example, you're based in Germany. Cool. There is, of course, your local city government, which you can try and go to, but not every city has an Asia department. Let me say that. Okay, Hamburg has one. Maybe Munich has one.
Yeah.
I think somewhere in West Germany, Düsseldorf, Duisburg, they maybe have one. And that's about it. Maybe Frankfurt also, I can imagine. But that's Germany, right? So only 4 cities in a really big mercantilistic country have a China department. So then I would urge for you guys out there, followers, if you have a local government that doesn't do China things, then just go to your national government. That's fine. Every national government has a foreign ministry, and in said foreign ministry, you have usually a China department. So you can do an internship in that China department. You can work towards China if you feel like that's your calling. I would urge you to learn a little bit of Chinese. That really gives you leverage. But of course, Asia per se is not necessarily limited to or limited by China, right? So you could also say, speak Japanese, speak Korean. I want to do Asia at large. Cool. Go for it. Exactly. Meet the people. Try and see what they write on LinkedIn, perhaps. Then write them on LinkedIn. If they don't react on LinkedIn, try and go to some events that the foreign ministry organizes. That really could work. Exactly. I have some friends who work for example, the Estonian foreign ministry. And they got their job because somebody told them, hey, there's an opening. So they just went and did it.
Exactly. Damn. And do you also have like some thoughts around like for the people here who actually live in Asia and like are Asian?
Ooh, I mean, that depends. If you want to do Asia policy in Asia, that obviously just means trying to see whether you have relations to your neighbors. I have a friend who works in the Japanese government and she wants to do Japanese-China relations, which is very difficult to do because the countries have notoriously not had very good relations. But that's always pretty interesting to see that you can still do Asia relations within Asia.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And getting into your government always depends on the structure, obviously. I can't give you an advice on how to get into the Chinese government because I don't live in China, but I know how the Chinese Communist Party works. But in democracies, it's usually rather straightforward. So Japan works really well. Korea, I think it's not too hard to get into the Korean government, at least the Asia division. I have a friend that told me she was trying to do it. So that could be interesting. What else? Asia policy at large depends on ASEAN also, right? So there's the ASEAN, which is sort of the European Union for Asia.
Oh, yeah.
They meet sometimes to discuss stuff. China is a part of it, and China is dominating it a little bit recently. So that's something.
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of haven't thought about that exists, but of course, kind of like, Okay.
It does exist, and to be fair, European policymakers don't interact with ASEAN enough, as far as, it should happen more.
That's interesting. Yeah, right. They don't do that, like the European Union and like ASEAN.
Well, European Union has institutions, right? They have the European Union, they have the European Chamber of Commerce. They have that goes to other countries and works there. They have the European Parliament in Brussels. ASEAN doesn't really have that. ASEAN is more like a loose sort of meeting that happens rather often, and then of course they will try to make institutions eventually, but there's nobody in Japan that says, oh super, we're going to work together with Cambodia and we together will be like a country union, because as you might know, a lot of countries were previously invaded by Japan or had previously evil or nefarious dealings in some kind of way with other Asian countries. So there isn't that kind of like trust thing going on that the EU has, although one can say that the EU also has problems with trust. Look at Hungary and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know much about what's happening.
I think a friend of mine from the conference just told me in Hungary they were putting up posters saying kill the EU, but then at the same time, or get rid of the EU, which is just like, you get all of your money from the EU. Why do you want to get rid of the EU? That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, get it.
You know?
Damn. Yeah, they're like so many things like we don't know, or like that I don't understand, and that's also why I like have this podcast, to understand more.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like you're working there. Okay, that's interesting. Is there some other stuff like which is important when it comes to like Asian politics, or like China, Taiwan, or that
China-Taiwan is a whole thing in itself.
Yeah,
So
please.
I'm not going to go on record and tell you my prediction about whether Taiwan is actually going to be invaded by China, because that's probably a whole, sack of thoughts in itself.
Yeah.
But what I can say is that while I was in Taiwan, I attended a class called Cross-Strait Relations.
Yeah.
So in the Chinese context, the whole Taiwan-China thing is seen in sort of a different way, right? So every Taiwan president is always going to be seen as not left-wing, right-wing, but close to China or distant from China. Similar to how every Korean president has in the past been seen as, are you very against North Korea reunification, very much pro it? Similar to how in China, certain parts of the party are very much, we need to invade Taiwan right now. And some are like, well, these are chill brothers of ours. We might need to foster good relations with them in the future.
Yeah, so both exist.
Both
right?
exist. There's different wings in all of these countries, right?
Yeah.
But what I think is a really key takeaway from the 20th Party Congress, which happened in China just a month ago, or half a month ago, that in the opening statement of Xi Jinping, he said a variety of cool things about how he's going to govern the country in the next 10 years, or 5 years rather, but let's face it, it might be 10. And the part that got most replayed later on social media is not the part where he said, we're going to, end zero COVID, or we're going to make relations with the States be more competitive. But no, the part that was most replayed was, we're going to take back Taiwan.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So he made the commitment to that by speech. The question is how the Chinese hardliners in the state will or will not hold him to it.
Yeah.
So often a lot of people think, the Chinese government is so anti-Taiwan. They want to take Taiwan by force. How dare they? They've kind of locked themselves into a corner, because there's a lot of sort of people in the Chinese state that are then like, okay, Xi Jinping makes this promise. He should follow up on it. He should actually do deeds and not just talk. Right?
Okay.
Similar how,
Interesting.
Yeah, in the West, you have similar things in Norway. I reckon you do as well. When a politician says something and then other people are like, you made promises, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you say it out loud, then you should do it. Yeah. Or I think also that's where in England or something, there was just recently, I'm not sure if it was like Prime Minister who retreated or something.
Oh, yeah.
Because like she was like, when I got elected, I told everyone that I was going to do these things, but now I see I'm not able to do it. So yeah, I'm stepping back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of such like fresh air to also hear like a politician be like, yeah, you know what? Like I actually can live up to what I said. So I'm backing off. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I must say in the UK example, I think it was also because many people were telling her, if you don't step back, then we're going to like shut this whole government down. Like she was doing a lot of not mistakes, but you know how when government is really unstable and a lot of people are betting on the government being unstable, so a lot of the markets kind of crash.
Yeah.
That's a little bit what happened in the UK, I think.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not a UK politics expert. I'm just a politics
neither.
expert in general. So.
Yeah, but you are. So yeah, you are in general. So yeah. Okay. Actually, like to pull that back a little bit, that's actually really interesting, because I kind of caught myself being like headline reader right now too, because that's the only thing I know. And now I put it out there like on the podcast. So it was kind of good that you kind of like, I'm not sure if that's what's happened. Like I have more context.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's fair. We have a generation of headline readers
really
that we
true.
are. It's very interesting actually that headlinization of media is really something that is happening right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. Can you explain, or like?
Yes, I want to explain actually.
Yeah.
So just today I saw a really interesting figure.
Okay.
Imagine you have in every country a newspaper that is content heavy and a newspaper that is headline heavy. The headline heavy newspaper in Germany is called Bild, which literally just means picture. Yes, super boring as fuck, because it's just a lot of big pictures, small text, big headlines. Yeah. So say, for example, we have a headline recently, which has to do with the Hamburg city government. So it's an interesting piece of gossip. China or the China Ocean Shipping Corporation wanted to purchase a sort of part of the Hamburg harbor. So we have one terminal called Tollerort, where we now have a 24.9% share of China. They first wanted to have 35%, but we said from 25% onwards, you actually have the ability to control how things going on a little bit. And so we're going to make it so that it's only 24.9. So you have a big share, but it's not big enough to actually decide the future of the terminal and how it's going to be. Anyway, to not get too far into detail here, the big reaction from Chinese newspapers was super interesting. It was the headline heavy ones were Hamburg harbor is being sold to China. Hamburg loses its soul. The long arm of Beijing is grabbing for power again. You know, you can imagine the headlines. And then sometimes the small text would be like, so actually it's not clear that the deal is actually going to happen. Well, 6 ministries are against it, but the chancellor wants to push it through. You know, you actually see the big and the fine print. But that's really what it is, fine print. Have you ever read fine print when you build an IKEA bed? I haven't. I just looked at the pictures, right? So nobody wants fine print, and that's why usually you don't really read the fine print as much, only if you find the topic really interesting. And a lot of people find politics interesting but don't have time for all kinds of politics. They focus on one thing. Usually it's domestic politics. In my case, it's international politics. And so they only look at things that pique their interest, that they see in the newspapers.
Exactly.
And so I guess what I want to finish this number, what I told you was 1,200,000 people in Germany. That's approximately 1%, well, actually nearly 2% of the population read this newspaper. So it's an Auflage, which means the amount of times this newspaper is printed is 1.2 million per day. What's the other newspaper that is more content heavy, that is more well known, that is more well loved? 100,000 times per day.
Oh, wow.
So it's 10 times less. Let that sink in your mind a little bit. So 10 times less people actually read full articles than read headlines.
Exactly. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a bit scary. Actually,
So that just leads me to believe that we are headed towards an age where we really need to make headlines smart, where journalism can also be an impact area.
Exactly.
And that's why you're also doing some
right,
podcasts like this. This is essentially a form of journalism, and I really appreciate you for it.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Trying. I think it can be good. And I I'm also trying to catch myself in my thinking and also be better. And I think at least inviting people who are into EA, like effective altruism, is really smart. So you get these moments like this where you're kind of I didn't sense make that good on that part. I actually just read the headline or just saw I guess I actually just saw a TikTok video or Instagram reel of that speech, I think, saying that I didn't do as I planned, so therefore I retreat. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. And then I probably went to the next video instead of watching the whole thing. So when I intentionally are trying to research, then of course I'm reading the fine prints, and then I'm going into details and really try to understand the topic. But at my free time or when I'm just procrastinating and so on, then I also get influenced by the media that I consume, but I don't think about it that much. But apparently enough so that it is impacting you.
I think it is impacting you. I mean, of course, you're referring to something else, which is that there is now new forms of media. I was just talking about old media like newspapers. New media like TikTok is essentially the videoification of headlines, right?
Exactly.
So you have 15 seconds of shit that you look at and you're like, wow, okay, I've seen, you probably saw this meme. There's a person walking up the stairs and they're falling down on the trampoline, going up on the stairs again. That was everywhere last week. And everybody made their own thing out of it. So it's very interesting that some videos which you see, they have an immediate meaning to you, but they can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
That's so true.
And that's what TikTok brings about. And that's very, very awesome, right? You can see a speech of, for example, in this case, I guess the person stepping back, the English or British Prime Minister. And you can interpret it in a positive way. And if you look at the comments, a lot of people will interpret it in a very negative way. They will say, oh, she finally fucked off or whatever.
Exactly.
And so with the guy on the trampoline, same thing. Some people were like, oh, this is just me when I get home in the evening. I find my key and it takes me ages or whatever. And then people are like, oh, this is so inspiring. You know, it shows that every single time you fall down, you get back up again or whatever.
Yes.
So we are living in an age where different kind of medias can always be interpreted in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And that leads to the fact that there can essentially be, and that I think is the really big takeaway from this, there can be separate societies existing within kind of the same internet. There's a right-wing kind of a bubble that uses the same meme as the left-wing bubble, but looks at it in a different way.
Yeah.
It's Wednesday, my dudes. Universal meme. Could be instrumentalized by the left, could be instrumentalized by the right. The guy that looks back, you know, at his girlfriend kind of going past or whatever.
Yeah.
That meme is definitely used in both left and right.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. I think the internet is such a fascinating place.
It is.
Yeah, I think I was getting a bit off track. Let's get back to politics.
Yeah.
So I guess final words.
Yeah. So, yeah.
If you want to do politics, you don't have to be in a party. One big takeaway from this.
Cool.
If you want to inform yourself, don't only read headlines, but be aware of the fact that headlines are everywhere, and don't get mad at people if they only have read the headlines. Kind of talk to them nicely and say, oh yeah, I've seen that too, but did you also know that there's a bit of context to this?
So good. Yeah.
And then I guess number 3, the thing that I kind of wanted to make as a bottom line of this, journalism can be a cause area. Policy is a cause area, and there's always a linkage between the two. So be curious and try and see whether you can find new cause areas in a lot of things that you can do on the daily. Just talk to somebody today who was like, we should make more people care about migration flows, not because we don't want people to migrate. They're going to migrate no matter what, because living standards in different countries are different. But if you want to foresee it, if you want to forecast it and actually make living standards in other countries that are currently having problems better, then you might be able to have less of an issue in the future with politics and with terrorism and all of that kind of thing, right? Because a lot of the right-wing winners of elections recently have been because people have been feeling unsafe. Not because they're actually unsafe, because of headlines, because of perceived idiocy, right? And so in order to avoid that, you can probably try and look at whether you can make countries feel less problematized in the whole refugee space and avoid refugee flows by improving life situations. That's obviously like something that is very hard to do.
Yeah.
But it could be a new cause area. And that's my point. Everything can be a cause area. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time, Mo.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was really, really great to be on here.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Mo. I really appreciate it again. And thanks to everybody listening to this part. If you have any feedback to Mo or to me regarding this part of the episode, please let us know in the comments or anything. And yeah, but again, I just want to say thank you so much to Mo for doing this. And then to the next part of this podcast, which is Reese. So Reese, here we go. Yeah, so hey man.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up? Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Love the EAGX and love what you're doing as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. So for the people who just like listening or watch this, like we're currently at this like effective altruism conference. And like it's really cool to see different people and how they are trying to like achieve like their highest impact possible and like the backgrounds of that. So yeah, like let's just like jump straight into it. Like with you, like I'm curious, like like I just gave you an introduction, but if like from your perspective, like how do you view like some of the most important things you do, or like how is your journey currently going?
Hi everyone again. My name is Reese. So I consider myself to be a change maker and a community builder. So what I think to be my sort of biggest strengths is bringing people together. And I think my goal for impact is sort of figuring out what and through what ways, through what mediums, through what sort of strategies can I bring more people together to sort of create social good. So I think my journey previously has a lot to do with sort of social impact, building social impact projects, engaging young people, empowering them to start their own projects and take them to the next level. But yeah, after coming to this sort of EA conference, I'm sort of now thinking about, you know, what is the best way to increase my impact and what are the sort of strategies to do so. Yeah.
Amazing. You can also just look at me, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But all good. That's super good for the introduction. Yeah, cool. So, and like, how do you currently do that? Like you have been building up like your entrepreneurial. So maybe you can touch a little bit on that.
Yeah. So back in Hong Kong, I ran a youth-led nonprofit that was all about trying to cultivate global citizenship through project-based learning. So what that looks like was two fronts. We created media, so podcasts, magazines, docu-series on actually LGBTQ plus rights. On the other end, it's all about training. So we involved over 300 volunteers across 80 schools in Hong Kong and Asia Pacific. Where we got these young people to really champion projects from start to finish. So they could come up with their own event ideas, podcast ideas, and they manage that as project managers essentially. And we find that having that autonomy and control, being able to sort of manage these projects from start to end, really help develop these young people's confidence in themselves and also the skills for the future of work. So that's something I've been really passionate about is
Amazing.
How can young people thrive in a world that's constantly changing? What are the skills they need, right, to be people who make a difference? So I've always been sort of interested in that. I think the second thing is also just getting out there and getting the word out about sort of this idea of change making and social impact. So I've been doing a lot of sort of speaking engagements, just talking to people in schools, but also some of these conferences where it's about how in this new rapidly changing world, our expectations for young people must change, right? It's not just about academics anymore. It's not just about this sort of linear form of success. But much like what EA is all about, it should be, our lives should be thinking about, you know, what is the way we can leave a legacy of impact? So that's sort of my sort of philosophy right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Like, so actually like I think it's around 30 to 40% of the people who will probably listen to this and so on, they live in Asia. And most of my guests until now, I think, have been non-Asian. But I often get like messages from people watching like what I do in Norway, and they're like, oh man, like easy for you to do, maybe. And they try to like ask about like, how can I do similar like entrepreneurial stuff or like altruistic stuff, like when living like across the other side of the world. And I'm not always so sure like what I'm going to reply because I don't have the experience, like I don't live there. But like you're a really good example, I think, of like somebody like across the globe which also does like basically the same thing, or like we're like in similar pathways. But like how has it been for you, like and how did you get to where you are now?
So I think definitely for people out there in Asia, I think definitely a challenge is also the cultural barrier. I think this idea of altruism is definitely taking off throughout the world. But I think the question is, how can you get sort of mainstream acceptance, and how can you find a community that will support you? So for my journey and my story, really, it started around 3 to 4 years ago now, where I was working as an intern at a mental health charity. And I exactly came to that realization that in Hong Kong and in Asia more broadly, we were very focused on academic success. We were focused on this very traditional conception of success, not about impact, not about altruism. And then at the same time, I felt boxed in, and I felt that I wasn't given ownership over my learning journey. So I wanted my learning journey to be about how can I create the most impact. But again, as most institutions do, especially in Asia, it was about, okay, just get good grades, get to a good university, and just figure things out from there. Just live a stable life, right? So it was that at that point where I realized to myself, there was a gap in Hong Kong. There wasn't really a platform for people to engage in this sort of thinking, but also this sort of project-based learning. So that was when I actually started my nonprofit. But definitely there were a lot of challenges in that, you know, it took a while to sort of scale. It took a while. It's been 3-4 years now, but it's taken a while to sort of get people to recognize the power of this sort of project-based learning, the power of sort of impact and altruism. But I think it's definitely doable if you find the right community around you, because no matter where you are, even if the sort of mainstream thinking isn't really aligned to impact yet, there's always going to be people that are passionate about it. And if you find them, connect with them, build with them, then you're still able to scale and still be able to do a lot of good things.
Amazing. Do you have some examples maybe like from people joining, or like
Yeah, a lot. So
cool.
For example, around 3 to 4 years ago in Hong Kong, there wasn't really an ecosystem for this sort of youth-led projects and initiatives. And a lot of times they were just mainly like school clubs, right? As you'd expect, like a debate club at your school. But after we started, and especially actually since COVID hit. So this is one of the sort of unintended positive effects. Is that people found that with the digital tools we have nowadays, with the ability for all of us to create content, to sort of organize communities, we sort of, I think, kick-started an ecosystem of all these young people, especially in Hong Kong, starting their own youth-led initiatives and projects. So there are organizations that, again, focus on bringing social issues to light. A lot of organizations focusing on sustainability issues and projects as well. So I think there is now really much more of a movement also around just Asia more broadly, where young people are like, especially since COVID, I can build digital communities. I don't have to have an office space. I don't have to spend all this money on sort of all these in-person aspects, and I could still build a really strong movement. And I think as a result, we've seen a lot of amazing young change makers also from Asia. Again, whether or not there is full cultural acceptance is another issue, but these people are creating impact. And I think that's also what's most important.
Exactly. And like regarding that, like the cultural acceptance and so on, like for people who like have like, you know, like their family and friends are like not that supportive and so on, but they really would like to do this, like but maybe their parents are really like, no, like the academic, like you should do this, like you should become a doctor or like whatever. Like, do you have some tips for them or like some thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, but I think there's two ways to go about it. One is with your sort of their support, and one is without. And I think how you could sort of build support is sort of at least gradually articulating to them why this path you're taking will actually lead to sort of greater success or greater returns. And it's back to this idea of articulating what is needed in our changing world of work and what is needed in our changing society. So one thing that's really great about EA is they always have this idea that you know, you can do good, but you can also be doing better at the same time. So one of these core aspects of EA is especially 80,000 hours, great resource, right? They always articulate this idea of career capital. And a lot of the times, interestingly, the greatest way to create career capital is also to create impact. And when you're creating impact, when you're building projects, when you're having this sort of thinking, you gain so many skills in such a short period of time. You rapidly grow. That prepares you much better than I think any academic preparation can. So I think it's really trying to articulate to them, we are in a new world, meaning that there are new expectations and there are new ways to achieve success, actually. So it's trying to, I suppose, bring them to these arguments, maybe show them some sort of these resources, show them really the statistics in terms of what's out there. What are the skills that you need, right? And you can tell them, well, by building this project, by building this initiative, I'm actually achieving all these skills. I'm massively expanding my network, like exponentially, something I could never do if I just focused on academics, and why that's important to you. But again, I think a lot of times one of the challenges is they won't be convinced, right? Because they are in their own mindset. So I think it's also finding a support network outside of that. So finding other people who are on similar journeys, right? Connecting to networks, connecting to these sort of people who produce content, people who maybe are just one step ahead of you, and sort of asking them for advice, but also just finding people around you, like your peers, your friends, and just getting together and building it, right? And again, back to sort of the parents' angle, it's also showing them how you can balance your time. So it's not to say you can completely flunk academics and just forget about it, right? But it's also saying, you know, in a world where we're in right now, you don't necessarily have to choose between both. You can have the best of both worlds, and you're able to still create amazing projects and create a big impact. So those are my two strategies.
Awesome. I hope that helps. Yeah. And what do you consider, like, if I can ask, like some of the more like toughest stuff about like the journey of like being your own boss, I guess, and like going for it, like
I think definitely a big one for me is accountability, because at the end of the day, when you're your own boss, or when you're the person who has to sort of be in charge of the vision, the execution as well, then there's no one to hold you accountable, which means that there's no structure, right? So unlike maybe an academic institution, unlike when you're living with your parents, for example, there is that sort of accountability structure that's built in. But when you're on your own, it means that you have to be accountable for yourself, for your team, and for the organization. And one thing that I found was really important is this idea of distributed leadership over time. It's that, yes, you can create an amazing vision, an amazing plan. You can be the one that always checks in on everyone and supports them. But I think what's the best accountability mechanism is when everybody plays a role in leadership and has a stake in it, meaning that they hold everyone else accountable as well. So I feel like that's how you address this challenge of accountability is you empower others to hold you accountable and you hold them accountable as well. So it's this mutual support structure. But another challenge is definitely also trying to prioritize, because I think once you sort of get started, then you sort of come across so many opportunities, right? There's so many things you want to do.
Yeah.
There's so many big ideas you have. And it's easy to get, I think, distracted so easily. You're like, maybe that's a better idea. Maybe that's a better opportunity.
Yeah,
so I'm sure you feel the same. So it's like, how do you prioritize what's going to be best for you? What's going to be best for the world? And that's been a challenge. And how I deal with it is really back to this sort of effective altruistic thinking, also thinking about just long term. How does this fit into my own roadmap for my life, for my strategy?
Yeah.
Like, is this just a small little like win, small blip, or can this actually lead to more meaningful connections, opportunities, something that's like qualitatively like meaningful for yourself? I think that's been a good framework to have.
And you said something interesting there, like your like roadmap. I'm curious about your roadmap.
Yeah.
Like how does that look?
Yeah. So I think, I've always been involved in the social impact space. And I think my goal will always be to sort of create the most impact. But I think the big question is how to get there, right? So my roadmap is thinking really in terms of two main areas. One is entrepreneurship, definitely, because I still believe that entrepreneurship has unlimited potential for growth, meaning that unlike any other career path, as a sort of entrepreneur, you're able to sort of build something that is bigger than yourself. And as a result, you're able to scale your impact exponentially. Any more than sort of if you're even in a position of power in, say, the public sector, you're still constrained by a lot of the institutions and structures in place. But if you're able to really build something that has almost a mind on its own, it can really scale exponentially. So as a result, entrepreneurship is I think my best bet, and that's my aspiration. But I'm also realistic in a sense, it's very challenging, right? There's a high chance of failure. So it's also this idea of skill building and building career capital. So maybe building skills through things like consulting, at least initially. That's my backup plan. But my aspiration is definitely entrepreneurship.
Cool. Okay, so another thing I'm wondering about, which, like, because I'm trying to also find some good resources for people out there. Like, do you have any good resources like which have helped you in your journey, like books, documentaries, I don't know, web pages?
So I think quite a few things. I think starting off with EA sort of related content, one thing that I came across not too long ago is 80,000 hours. And I think why 80,000 hours is so useful for students, young professionals as well, is because they're really practical about career advice, but their career advice is aligned with impact. So a lot of career advice out there is all about the hustle, all about just how do you make big bucks and all of this sort of profit motive. And that's all great. And sometimes these strategies can still work. It's about the mentality. It's about, how you approach things in life. But I think what's great about 80,000 hours, it's sort of thinking about the end goal, right? So what is the point of, getting all this money? What is the point of building all of this capital if you don't have a real purpose behind it or a real passion behind it? So the thing what 80,000 hours articulates is you can have the best of both worlds. You can still create impact while doing good for yourself, thinking strategically about your career. So they have really good career resources. They have really good guides on each career path and how perhaps it can create more impact. Is it right for you? And there's lots of ways to engage with that. Other sort of ideas that I came across in my own social impact journey is also thinking about these different frameworks that are useful. Something that I'm still grappling with is sort of this idea of theory of change. And basically what it is sort of, let's say when you're trying to start something, it's always very important to think about how what you're doing, all these operations, can actually lead to the change that you're looking for. So I think a lot of the times, especially entrepreneurs, when we want to rapidly build things, we just want to build towards an MVP, we want to launch and we want to just get it out there, right? But I think something that's important, especially if you're trying to go towards impact, is thinking about, is this product I'm building going to achieve these desired outcomes? Because you could build a product, get it out there, get a lot of people into it, hype it up, and get a lot of users and that sort of thing. But that's great. That's a good metric. But is that what you originally intended? Do you have is that reaching your impact goals? So I think these different frameworks out there in the social impact space are still really useful to just help you think about impact, help you sort of align what you're doing with these outcomes. So those are my top 2 resources. But there's a lot out there. I think nowadays, even a Google search can give you so much, which is again why I think everyone now has the capacity and the potential to become these change makers, to become these entrepreneurs. Just because as long as you have the mindset, there's so much help out there. There's so many resources out there that you can really get a lot of things done.
Amazing. Yeah, 80,000 hours is mentioned a lot on this podcast, and it's going to be one episode, if I haven't already done it, on 80,000 hours.
Awesome.
Yeah. So because I don't know what I'm publishing first. So but yeah, that's amazing. Wow. What was the other? Yeah. You do a lot of public speaking. Same do I, and I know there's a lot of people who want to get into that. And have different strategies. I remember one time I was going to all the public speaking event. It was one of my first. It was one of the biggest I've been doing at that time. Awesome. And I remember I had to so they're doing the introduction, right? They are like, okay, welcome up on stage, Martin Skadal, woo, and everybody's clapping. I go up on stage, I feel so unwell, and I look out at the crowd, and I'm I felt I was so feeling bad. So I just had to say to everybody, thank you, give me 1 minute. And I'm just running out of the venue to get some fresh air. And I was like, what is happening with me? It was so bad. And then I went back in and I meditated for 2 minutes on stage, which is really weird.
Oh, that's awesome. No, that would have been amazing. If I was the audience member, I'd be like, wow. It's suspenseful. What's he gonna say next?
Yeah, it was exactly. Yeah, and then it went on. It was a really good event. I would say I got some good feedback. I was really happy. But the nerves can be really real, right? But maybe not. So that's why I'm just now it's okay. I'm always nervous, but it's just okay. I'm sharp. I feel I'm just okay. I'm prepared. I'm gonna do this. Good nerves. But how is that for you?
Yeah, so believe it or not, I'm actually an introvert. So my energy, in a way, I don't necessarily get that much energy from being around people, which I think to be quite funny because I'm a community builder. But I think it's just needing that time to recharge as well. But what I think is sort of great about public speaking is therefore, in a way, it's a different type of activity. At the core, it's the same. You're trying to connect with people, you're trying to deliver a message, but you can be someone who doesn't sort of thrive off energy, being in big group spaces and crowds, but still be a very effective public speaker. And I think a lot of it also has to do with just your goal and what if your sort of altruistic notions in a way. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about yourself, it's also about the message you're trying to communicate. Again, the impact you're trying to create. And I think that sometimes helps you calm your nerves when you think about the bigger picture. Why am I here? What's my purpose here? What am I trying to get done? What is the message I want to get across? And I think that's really empowering. Yeah.
Have you had any or do you do Q&As and so on?
Yeah.
Have if you can remember any of the typical questions you will get in a Q&A or
So once I was doing this presentation at this educational conference back in Hong Kong, and the audience was all sort of educators, principals and that sort of thing. And I was, two things that was interesting about that was one of these engagements where I thought I've really made an impact because it was sort of a multimedia presentation. I talked for a bit, showed some of the content my organization was working on, and they really connected with it. You could sort of sense that there was a silence, there was this moment of gravitas. They were really impacted by it. And from the Q&A, they were asking already, how can I implement this at my school? What are the action items? How can I follow this up? Or they were already talking about pain points, which means that they really thought about it. They thought about what would this look like in action. So I thought that was really important. But they asked the difficult questions. They asked, yes, let's say the presentation is about incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion in international schools. And my thinking was it has to be student-centric, right? You can have all these policies in place in schools in general, But if it's not revolving around the student, if you're just implementing it from like a top-down perspective, it's never going to work. And their thinking was like, yeah, we want to do all of this, but sometimes the students just don't want to get involved. Like those are some really hard questions, right? And I think the best way to approach hard questions in general is to always give yourself like a pause, just give yourself some time to think. But also sometimes you don't need to know all the answers. You know, you could say, that's a great question. You know, I haven't really thought about it, or I haven't sort of developed like a full understanding of it, but you can still give it an attempt. So it's just also acknowledging that you're not perfect, you don't have all the answers, but also pointing them to the right directions is also very helpful.
Yeah.
So what are resources they could tap into? Maybe that you could sort of follow up with them afterwards as well. So I think it's just giving yourself in Q&A a lot of exit opportunities as well, not just being so definitive, so sure of yourself. Always makes it to be just more useful for the audience as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I also have like on my webpage, you can always go and book like just like free like Zoom one-to-ones and so on. And there's often like some students who just want to talk about like their project or like somebody was thinking about a altruistic career and like want to talk about that. And I always say like when I'm ending my public speaking event that like for the introverts here, or like for the people who don't want to raise their hand right now, or like maybe you just like suddenly you're like, oh, I want to actually ask you about something. Then you can just go to the webpage, you can just book a free one-to-one, which is still up. So if my people listening and watching want to talk, just do that. It's really nice. Like you never know like how you can help people sometimes and how good it can be. Like some people for like reaching out, it can be like so hard to like I'm not sure if I am like, am I good enough to like reach out or like say hello, and like of course like just like do that. That's great. What else is important for you these days?
I think it's definitely figure out my priority areas. So one thing that's again really core to effective altruism is also prioritizing causes. So what issues you should work on. So one thing that's something that I've been figuring out is sort of, you know, my work has always been in education. My work has always been on sort of empowering individuals, groups, communities, but also figuring out, you know, what is the thing that the world needs the most and how can I best contribute? So one thing that is on my mind a lot is like, you know, am I focusing on the right areas? And if not, like maybe how I can blend my passion, strengths, interests into contributing to a cause that can create a lot more impact. So that's definitely on my mind. But secondly, it's also sort of what's next in terms of my own projects. What next do I want to build, and how does that align as well?
Yeah.
So definitely sort of just figuring out opportunities. What are some gaps out there that I could really contribute to?
Amazing. And also I'm curious about like, because you now live in London. Or? Yeah. So like, how has that been? Like moving and like doing work or like studies and so on, like from abroad and
Yeah. So again, I'm from Hong Kong, so it still was a big city. So to that extent, it was a sort of a biggest change. But I actually got my phone stolen back in London a few weeks back.
Oh.
That was pretty shocking. I was like, wow. It was a guy on a bike, literally just drove right past me, got my phone.
No way.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Again, that was something I would never expect in Hong Kong. But again, it's sort of those things where it happens to you once and you're much more careful about it afterwards.
Wow.
So there's definitely that shock. But one of the great things about being in London or just being in a new environment means there's a lot more new networks to tap into and a lot more new things to explore. So that's something I've been taking advantage of, just trying to connect to as many people as possible, as many networks as possible.
Cool.
Because I always believe in the effect of like this network effect, right? Is that if you're able to tap into the power of these networks, you're able to access their unique like connections, their unique strengths, and you're able to get a lot of things done. I've been definitely I've only been in London for a month, but I've been able to, I think, meet a lot of great people and sort of build my network there. So
cool.
It's definitely great. And academically as well, I go to the London School of Economics. One of the great things about a sort of a university that doesn't have a real campus is that you're basically in London and you're in and around London, which means, again, you have a lot of freedom to define what you want to focus on, what you want to do, who are the people you want to meet, what are the projects you want to work on. So I think that's actually been really helpful for me.
Amazing. And for people who maybe want to do that themselves, like, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, so I think definitely location is really important when you're thinking about applying to universities, but also from the network point of view, it's just getting yourself out there. So I think a lot of the times people are maybe hesitant to sort of overcommit or to join too many things, but always think about at the same time, yes, your own capacity, but also maybe how you can contribute to these networks as well. And last but not least, I think it's also just keeping a lookout for opportunities. I think even right now, I'm always overwhelmed at times because there's like 20 different thousand opportunities out there, but it's still really helpful to sort of just keep an eye out. Always maybe have a look, chat with someone to see like what are they up to. LinkedIn has been a really helpful platform as me as well, just to connect with others on similar journeys. But just keeping an eye for what's out there, make sure you're not missing like important deadlines for these like incubators, fellowships, or opportunities, and apply. And I think one of these areas is once you start getting these first opportunities because you take initiative, I really believe in this idea of sort of increasing your surface area of luck, meaning that once you start tapping into a lot of these early opportunities because you really got yourself out there, then more opportunities will come towards you because you know you're able to have built like a reputation, you're able to make some good progress, good impact. And again, some people might think that's luck, but I think it's actually something that you took a lot of care and action into sort of making sure that you're at the right place in the right time when an opportunity comes at you, and you're able to take advantage of that.
That's so good. Like that's another way of saying like putting yourself in a position to succeed.
Exactly.
Kind of. Yeah. I love that. But how did you call it? You said
increasing your surface area of luck. Because I feel like sometimes it's like, if you think about it, it's like luck is like a shooting star that sort of falls in the sky, right? Yeah. Sure, if you think of it that way. But what if if you're like a little tiny dot, then the chances of that star or meteorite hitting you is like 0 to none. But if you're able, because of the way you connect with like your networks, if you're in the way you're able to, because you're ready all over the world, because you've met so many people, you've shown yourself to be someone who could create an impact, then your surface area is much wider, which means that chance of that one golden opportunity falling from the sky and hitting you is now, 30%, 40%. It's not guaranteed, but you're just at a much better position, right? You're at a much better point where you are set up for success. So I think that's been a really important sort of guiding mentality for me as well.
Amazing. I love that. Do you have any other tips on how, like you kind of mentioned it a little bit now too, but like of how to put yourself in a position to succeed or to increase your luck?
Yeah.
Like
surface area
of luck. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of it, again, is just getting started. So I think one thing that's been really helpful as well is also figuring out what's your story and what's the best way to communicate it. Because I think nowadays we're in a world where, digital is king. Essentially, everything about us is online. It's also about controlling your narrative. So it's figuring out what's your pitch, what's your story, who are you, like what are your goals? I think that's really important because that's what helps you be memorable. That's what helps you connect with people. And that's something that can evolve over time. That's something that doesn't have to be like one monolithic thing. It could change. But I think it's also figuring out who are you, what value do you have to add, what's your story. And that once you have that, then you can sort of get out there, apply the things, maybe fail, try again, just that whole process. And I think once you get the ball rolling, you might get a lot of rejections, but because you're applying to so many things, you're constantly iterating and improving, your chances of success are higher. And once you get that first sort of opportunity, again, it could be because someone believed in you, because no one else sort of saw the opportunity. It was like a market gap. It could be many things. But once you get that first, that first sort of opportunity, I think life becomes a lot easier because now you have this experience, you've met more people, and I think the journey becomes smoother once you're able to sort of get started. I think getting started is the hardest part, to be honest. Yeah.
Who are you?
That's a great one. But I think right now, the two words, I identify with most is change maker, because what's interesting is I worked for an organization that pioneered this idea of social entrepreneurship, and also they coined the word change maker, actually. So this organization is called Ashoka. They've been around for a long time, but their idea was 30, 40 years ago, they sort of pioneered this field of social entrepreneurship by selecting these amazing people worldwide, giving them support, fellowships to scale their impact. But why I consider myself a change maker and not yet a social entrepreneur is that a change maker could be anyone. Everyone listening to this, watching this right now can be a change maker because change making is simply identifying a problem around you, no matter how small, and being able to just create an impact, no matter how small. So it's almost
Beautiful.
a mentality. And I think what's different is a social entrepreneur is someone that perhaps is further along that journey. They change a system. They really introduce a new idea. And I'd like to aspire to that. And I like to think that I'm starting that journey. I think what's great is I can always identify as a change maker because that's inherent to sort of my thinking. I always, if I see a problem out there, I try to map out, prototype, or just come up with a solution, execute a solution, no matter how small. That's something I always identify with. And then the second word I always identify with is community builder. Because even if, I'm not the most extroverted person in the world, I really believe in this power of bringing people together and seeing the sort of connections people make, but also the power of groups, because I think no matter who you are and what you can do, this quote I really love is the whole is more than the sum of its parts, which is to say, you have one person, 1 plus 1 plus 1, technically it should be 3, right? But because of this idea of synergy, because you're all working on, you have different strengths and weaknesses, it actually 1 plus 1 plus 1 becomes 5 or 10 or 20 instead. And that's because you're in a group. So I am very interested in building groups, but also figuring out what's the best way to connect people. Because especially, and I think right now the conference we're at is a great example. There are many different strategies for connectivity, right? It's great. But a lot of communities out there that don't necessarily flourish because there isn't the proper facilitation. So let's say you just put 50 people together in a room, or you just create a group chat. You might think that's all it takes, right? I'm building a community. But sometimes then that community dies out in a month and you wonder, what happened, right?
Yeah.
And it means that there has to be a lot of work into maintaining that community and making sure that people get value out of it. So that's always been a big journey for me, is figuring out, okay, what are all these different strategies I can use to keep people engaged and really passionate about it.
Yeah, what's your main tips right now, based on experience, for community building?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, there's this big debate always about, can communities just self-sustain by themselves, or do they need facilitation? And I right now believe that there has to be some degree of facilitation, at least initially. There has to be someone that is sort of, even if it's a sort of self-organized community, someone will step up to take the charge of facilitation.
Yeah.
Just because in a group, if everyone is sort of just have your own sort of gender narratives, it's going to start to become unequal, meaning that some people might take more, some people might give less, give more, give less. So I think there has to be someone that helps bring these connections together. There are many ways you could do that. So I think for a few of these communities I've been in as well, it's definitely having these one-to-ones.
Yeah.
Super important one-to-ones. But also sometimes sort of randomly generated one-to-ones, because a lot of times some people might want to reach out to some people, et cetera, is imbalanced. So just randomly assigning one-to-ones, having them meet every week is, I think, a great way to sort of completely diversify your network and meet people you never expected or thought you'd meet. So that's a great one. But it's also thinking about what are things you can do together as a community, because I think there's lots of communities out there where it's just a network. So everyone's just there. And that's great. You start to know people, but then it's what's next? What is the action item? What are you going to do? What's the community for? So I feel some of the best communities I've been in, as communities I've helped build, are ones where there are some form of action afterwards. So working groups, committees, where people, let's say, align together by their interests, their work or areas, and they work together on a mini project. Because I think, you contribute something, you create something, that's always great. But also, when you're working on something together, you build bonds much more quickly. You understand what are each other's core strengths, weaknesses, and you get to know each other much better. So I think, my 2 top tips there as well, definitely projects, one-to-ones. Yeah.
Amazing. Do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say whoever's listening, whoever's out there, I think my advice to you is, again, the hardest part is getting started, because once you get started, once you're able to have that confidence in yourself, you're just able to get out there and access opportunities much more quickly. So I think my advice to you is figuring out who you are, what is your story that you want to tell, what is the impact you want to create, and after you sort of have that self-reflection, is just getting yourself out there, try to sort of meet as many people as possible, join these networks, and start building towards the life you want and the impact you want to create.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, Reese.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Awesome.
Thank
you, Reese. Again, I really appreciate it. And wishing you all the best with your work in Hong Kong. And to both of you, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And to everybody listening, feedback in the comments. If you have any suggestions for topics or for people I should talk to, let me know. I hope you will continue to have a nice day or good night if you're going to bed or whatever. And I hope to see you in the next episode. And remember to subscribe if you haven't, by the way, if you want to keep up with this. Okay, bye-bye.